Welcome to episode 52 of the Search with Candour podcast, recorded on Friday, the 13th of March, 2020. My name is Mark Williams-Cook, and today we are joined by guest speaker Natalie Mott, who is a freelance SEO consultant and trainer, former agency director, and she is going to be talking to us about SEO myths and misconceptions. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So Natalie, for those of you that aren't aware, was meant to be coming to our Search Norwich kind of SEO meetup event yesterday to essentially do this SEO myths and misconceptions talk as a presentation. And unfortunately, like so many events over the country in the last 48 hours, we did make the decision because of the coronavirus to cancel the event. Natalie has very, very kindly agreed to come on the podcast and just basically chat us through it. So thank you, Natalie. We were talking just before. So Natalie's someone who I've kind of followed and interacted with on Twitter now for absolutely ages. So I'm really excited. This is actually the first time I've spoken to her, which is brilliant. And I've always kind of followed her and looked up to the things she said. She speaks a lot of sense on Twitter because as we know, if you're on SEO Twitter, there's a lot of shit on there. So Natalie, again, thank you so much for joining us. Do you just want to give us a really quick overview of your background before we get going? It would be useful for the people that don't know you.
Sure. So I've been in the industry now knocking on 12 years, was in-house for a bit, and then most of my career has been agency side. Seen a lot of stuff in SEO, the good, the bad and the ugly. Been through some of the major algorithm changes, seen all of it to the point where an awful lot of myths and misconceptions have come up, and some of them still don't die. So I thought it was I thought it would be appropriate to cover these kind of things and try and set the record straight on some of them once and for all.
I mean, this is one of the reasons I tell people actually that we set up Search Norwich, which was to help businesses get a better understanding of SEO. So apart from having people in the SEO community sort of talking and mixing, and PPC people as well, the thing I've noticed, being agency side for well over a decade now, is even though I'm over a decade in, I'm still getting a lot of the time the same questions asked by businesses and seeing them making the same kind of mistakes over and over. And it pains me to say, in 2020, I still think that SEO, like you've said, is seen as some dark art. Do you think that's still the case?
It comes up so often. It comes up so that some business owners will come to you because they do not have time to look into their marketing full stop. So they want to outsource, the whole thing, part and parcel. But then some of them do take interest in some of their marketing, and then seem to have a bit of a block, and they just think, oh, it's too technical for me. You do weird things with Google, and in actuality, it's a marketing channel. If SEO is a dark art, then marketing arguably is. I mean, it kind of is, I suppose. Marketing, there's an awful lot you need to learn about it, but SEO can be taught, can be learned, and I don't know if this does people out of a job, but it's not as hard as it looks once you know what you're doing.
Oh, that's controversial. So in terms of that, I mean, so like historically, we've seen, I've seen, really good cases, and this is, I guess, how a lot of kind of black hat stuff comes up, which is people testing specific things that work in terms of SEO and getting sites to rank. So they're in terms of black hat, they're finding parts of the algorithm that they can exploit, and I think it's the consensus within the SEO community, taking black hat for instance, that's a lot harder nowadays because of the way Google's algorithm as a whole and all the little algorithms that make up the rankings, how that works now. It makes that kind of approach a lot harder. And we often hear about SEOs who are quote unquote chasing the algorithm and how that's a bad thing to do. Do you want to give us your take on that, and what does it mean when someone says, you shouldn't be chasing the algorithm, and why shouldn't we do it?
Well, I was thinking about this obviously for the talk, and I was thinking, is there ever been a time in my career where I have chased the algorithm? The times I can think of were quite a while ago, with the advent of Panda and Penguin initially, when a lot of the industry still haven't got with the program that there are webmaster guidelines for a reason. We all had a massive shock then. So there was an element of having to really react to an algorithm change then. And then the other one, possibly the Medic update in 2018. But even then, there's I always say to my clients, we've set a strategy for a reason. It's all in line with SEO best practice. Sometimes you might need to change your tactics because the competition is doing something dodgy. So you need to dial up a more dial up the activity on the white hat side of things to combat the black hat kind of thing the competition is doing. But otherwise, I always recommend just keeping on. I've not been involved in black hat for. There was a grey hat period when everyone was doing it. But
isn't the definition of grey hat though just the black hat stuff you don't think you're going to get caught for?
Well, indeed, and I mean, but that was possibly before the guest blogging update in 2014. That's when I started. Like, no, I'm 100% white hat now. So I'm not the person to ask about black hat tactics, but I do know that white hat SEO does tend to work in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's now hopefully a fairly well accepted fact. I mean, I've seen there are still things that you can do to trick Google, if you like, but as you say, those are I think there's definitely a shelf life on those things, because we're basically playing the kind of technological gap between Google not being able to work out what we're doing, and that's ever closing, and it's just sitting on the train tracks, because you will get caught at some point. So all the white hat stuff, like you say, it's longer term, but it's gonna be there. It's like an investment basically, rather than a trick to get you to rank. So your presentation you put together, I've just picked out, because there was a lot in there, I just picked out a few of the kind of myths and misconceptions that you'd listed, and I've got some favorites that I wanted to go through with you. You can help me grind my axe here. So, I mean, one of the first ones you had on your presentation was actually about fresh content. So this is something that we see repeated throughout the industry, which is, we're doing SEO, therefore you need to, Google likes fresh content, so you should do, so many posts a week. So we see this advice all the time. What's your kind of, how would you explain that as a myth to potential clients?
Well, the first thing I would say is the content. It can be as fresh as you like, but it has to be good. It has to have quality. And the idea of selling, packages of blog posts as if it's SEO is it's just not the right thing. It's a misunderstanding. I've had cases where I put together an extremely detailed and nuanced SEO strategy with all the things you need to do across technical content and link building, and people have zeroed in and gone, but what about the blog? Aren't we supposed to be doing the blog? How many posts you could do? How many words do they have to be? And it's like, well, we can do that if the keyword research tells us we need to do that. If the competition aren't doing it properly, if there's a place for it in the strategy, but 9 times out of 10, it's just, we need to do this because this is what we've heard SEO is, and that's not the case.
And I think maybe even in terms of specific verticals, so to give you an example, like to take an extreme example, like obviously news websites, like freshness is important in that specific case, I guess, because news is by definition something that's new. But if you've got, say, like a research-based site with papers on it and stuff, like the freshness of those papers is really almost completely insignificant, right? Because it doesn't matter if it was written one week ago or 2 years ago, because the paper is the paper and the date is the
Yeah.
date, right?
And they have editorial guidelines. Journalism has quality. There is quality control, depending on your views, but there is quality control on those kind of publications. It's not just the freshness of it that is causing those kind of articles to rank. And that's if somebody had their heart set on a blog strategy because they genuinely thought it was going to help their business, sure, but you need to focus on the quality as much as the quantity.
So I'll bring this up now while we're talking about SEO context to producing content. And so you've said before about SEO being a little bit more straightforward maybe than some people say, and we've talked about kind of quality of content in terms of SEO. Does the job SEO copywriter exist or not?
Well, should it do? No, I think a copywriter these days, I would say, needs to have SEO skills. But the SEO, the role of SEO copywriter from way back when was the people you'd look for would be people who can churn out an awful lot of content quite quickly. And going back to the subject of quality, it wasn't always there. We had a good however many years of just churning out stuff and flooding the internet with it. There are some excellent copywriters who are working in the SEO industry, but I do think the title SEO copywriter sort of limits people, and I wouldn't hire somebody with that job title.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, for me, as you say, there are, writing good content, copywriters are really important, and having some SEO understanding is important. And it's just something I've seen crop up with this kind of advice, that job title seems to surface quite a lot. While we're on content as well, we hear now, I think, more than we have done in the past, about how link building is dead. And I'm sure anyone now working in outreach or link building is just rolling their eyes like, oh, not again. And a lot of the link building, I've seen it's definitely in fashion over the last few years. Basically, for link building / outreach, it seems to be like 90% like digital PR. How much, what are your thoughts on link building now? Is link building dead, and is digital PR the route people should be taking?
Link building is definitely not dead, and digital PR can be extremely powerful, and draw an awful lot of attention to a brand, and amplify that brand, and have a positive impact on SEO if there is other SEO activity going on. So, in the context of the presentation I was going to give, my advice was really try not to put all your eggs in one basket with digital PR. It's not necessarily going to be the silver bullet you expect it to be. It can definitely help as part of a well-rounded SEO strategy. But there's plenty of things that you can be doing, or your SEO agency or partner could be doing, to acquire links to your website that don't involve going out to journalists and having a huge hero piece of content. An awful lot of the links that link builders will be building in the background are the ones that are a bit more traditional SEO kind of prospecting for links in an old school way. So still link lists, resource lists, areas of the web where you definitely should be referenced if your brand is in a certain industry. The main one that you see all the time when you pick up a new client, there's often going to be unlinked mentions or broken links because of 404s, and all of that is kind of housekeeping at the start of a campaign. But you'd be surprised how much that, I guess you won't be surprised how much that comes up a lot. Look into who's linking to your competitors. If there's sites that link to two or more of your competitors, there's a much better chance of you obtaining a link.
In terms of those couple of things you mentioned there, two things I think would be quite interesting just to go into slightly more detail there, for people that maybe haven't done these things before, which is unlinked mentions.
Yep.
And we'll touch back on link reclamation. So could you explain just very quickly, what are unlinked mentions? How do you find them, and how do you go about making them link mentions?
So unlinked mentions are sort of what they say they are. They are references to your brand name on the web that do not link back to your website. And sometimes that will occur because, say, your brand is referenced in a newspaper or an online newspaper, and they have a policy of not linking out. Those kind of unlinked mentions you probably don't want to chase. But when there are mentions of your brand across the web and it makes sense for the site that's featuring you to link out to you, that's a great opportunity to get in touch with them to say, notice you mentioned this, perhaps there was a piece of joint PR with them at some point, or you've exhibited at an event, or some kind of real world business relationship tends to result in an unlinked mention, and that gives you the chance to pick up the phone and try and convert that to a link. And you also asked how do you find them?
Yeah. So I was going to say, how would someone go about finding unlinked mentions?
So there are a few tools out there that will help you speed the process up, but generally, I will typically use Google. I'll typically do a site using the operator site colon in Google search. I will not site. Yeah, no, it is. You can find them in Google. You do a search for your brand in quotation marks and minus any reference to your brand from your website. So minus site colon enter website here.
So it stops your own website appearing for your own brand, which would presumably appear quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So that clears up any self-referencing mentions of yourself, and then you can, depending on how well known your brand is, you be able to scrape those results using the Scraper Chrome extension, or there are other Chrome extensions that will help you get that data into a spreadsheet. Then run that list of links through Screaming Frog and filter out. You want to then do a custom search for your domain, your root domain. Look at what contains your root domain and what does not contain your root domain. The data that does not contain your root domain will be your unlinked mentions, and then manually go through that and see which ones are appropriate. I hope I've explained it right.
Yeah, that was very clear. You mentioned earlier as well, when you find these, you said to pick up the phone. Is that actually the approach you take off the bat? You don't email, you try and ring first, or?
It depends on so I was talking about a situation where there might be a real world business relationship and there has been some joint PR or some joint content in the past. Depending on who owns the relationship with the link prospect, sometimes it will be more appropriate to pick up the phone. Most of the time, SEOs don't tend to pick up the phone. In my experience, you have SEOs who
right.
hide behind the screen, and PRs who love to pick up the phone. But I mean, that's another way to get in front of the competition. Really, if most SEOs aren't picking up the phone, then that's one way to get out in front.
The other thing you mentioned there, which I don't think you even gave it justice for, sort of what a technique it is that I think a lot of people just look straight over, was where you are finding websites that link to multiple sites that belong to your competitors. So if you've got 10 competitors, for instance, if you can find websites that link to 3, 4, 5 of them that don't link to you, that's a very well qualified, huge opportunity, or at least very interesting to see, hey, where are they being mentioned that I'm not?
Yeah.
How do you go about finding those? Is there a particular tool you use to do that?
Well, I think the reason I glossed over it is because there is a tool that makes light work of that, a couple of tools. The main one is Ahrefs Link Intersect, which will pull the link profiles of whichever competitors you mention, and then will exclude any sites that do currently link to you. And it spits out very quickly a list of link prospects for you to look at. Majestic has Click Hunter. I think Link Intersect's a bit more user-friendly. And then also you can manually do it as well if you're so inclined. Yeah. Pull all your link profiles and mash them in Screaming Frog somehow. But Ahrefs is probably where I'd start.
I like how you've been really fair though, and given Ahrefs and Majestic a mention. Cool. So what else did we have in here? So you've actually got in your presentation deck something that relates to a question I normally ask everyone I interview for SEO roles, which I quite liked, which was you had a slide here saying it's a myth that social media has a direct impact on SEO. Now, this is so if you ever interviewed me for an SEO role, this is probably a question I'll ask, which is, do you think social media like links have a direct impact on site ranking? And to be honest, like, you know, I've got strong opinions on this, but I don't mind what people really answer as long as they have a good kind of logical thought process and explanation behind that.
Yeah.
So you've kind of labeled this here as a myth. Do you want to talk to us about that? Because I think that is a really widespread myth that, you know, getting links even on stuff like Facebook is going to help me rank.
Yeah, so back to the idea of unlinked mentions. There is nuance here because of the changes in rules to no follow links. So I reserve my right to change this opinion at some point. But in my experience, obtaining links on social media, it's just the same impact as getting an unlinked mention. You'll have there are different schools of thought on this, and some SEO providers will swear blind that unlinked mentions and no follow links are having a direct impact on your SEO. But I have not seen that be the case. They can give an indirect uplift to your SEO, in as much as your brand may become more well known through going viral on social media. And so that means it gets put in front of more people, and in theory it will be put in front of more people that have the ability to link out to you with a followed link from an actual website. But otherwise, I think it's a red herring. I would be wary of anyone saying this has a direct impact on your SEO.
You certainly, I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable if that was like the primary basis of like link acquisition or link building. That would make me very nervous. The other myth you've got here is one we actually did a whole episode about this. We did a whole episode about different types of penalty in Google that you could get, because we're trying to clear up this misconception about sometimes when there's an algorithm update and your competitors increase in ranking and you go down, people think they've got a penalty. So we talk through the different types of penalty, and I think it's kind of slightly less now over the last few years, but I still do hear it, and we get lots of questions about it, which is customers, clients being worried about a duplicate content penalty. So do you want to talk us through your thoughts on duplicate content and penalties and what's true and what's not?
Yeah, so I was actually, when I was looking into this, I found that there was an article from Google from 2008, so the length of time I've been in the industry, that basically said that there is no duplicate content penalty back in 2008, and that has remained the case even through Panda, when the school of thought was that we were all being penalised for having duplicate content. Actually, it was about thinness and quality of content. But yeah, the myth still prevails. It's not a manual. So a penalty is a manual action. If you've received an actual penalty from Google, that you will receive a message in your search console. I haven't seen one of these for a long time. Not at all. So the thing about duplicate content, you do want to minimize the amount of duplicate content that you serve to search engines, because there is a risk that the duplicate page, or a page that is thinner than the page that you want to rank, the one that you would make canonical, there is a risk that page can outrank it and cause your preferred content to be ignored. The other thing, and this is most frequent with e-commerce sites or large travel sites or something, if there are huge use of parameters or filters or pagination, that if you are allowing all of that thin content to be served to search engines, then that can take up a lot of what's known as crawl budget. Now Google will say, don't worry too much about crawl budget, but there are if you analyze or if your SEO partner analyzes your server logs, you'll be able to see this thin content being crawled, and sometimes the content that you want to rank being ignored. So that's why duplicate content is still major thing in SEO. We pay an awful lot of attention to it, but you're unlikely to have been penalised if you see a change in your visibility and you're convinced it's to do with your content. It's more likely that the algorithm has identified higher quality answers to the queries your site is supposed to be targeting.
I think that's really interesting because we've got probably two camps of people when we say duplicate content. So from an SEO point of view, people working in that industry, maybe web developers, there is that thought about the website internally cannibalizing itself over very similar or identical pages, like you mentioned, when we come to things like filtering, faceted navigation, reordering lists on e-com sites, that kind of thing. And then there's I've had queries from clients who are literally just thinking about stuff like, oh, we saw a competitor has just copied one of our articles over. We're really worried that, Google's going to give us a penalty for like copying content because it exists in two places at once. And I think that's, like you said, it's important to understand, that's that kind of thing, especially in tiny cases like that, isn't going to trigger any kind of penalty. At worst thing you can probably expect is, Google will probably filter one of those results in that it will only show one. And if you're unlucky, it can be sometimes the person that's copied it. And I think we mentioned before as well, there are other routes to deal with that, like the digital Millennium copyright requests you can send. Google seem to action those quite quickly if people are, nicking content. And actually, I don't know if you saw this. I almost missed this. It was a few weeks ago now. Google said if there are multiple upheld DMCA takedown requests against the site, they'll take that into consideration algorithmically. I don't know if you saw that when it was announced, but I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, and then that led to a discussion about whether that's going to cause like a black market almost, for, well, not a black market, people literally blackmailing people about DMCA requests. There we go, another sub-economy in the SEO world. So we talked about duplicate content penalties. I really want to talk for the last sort of 5-10 minutes about audits. So we had Aleda Solis on a few episodes ago who just blew our minds with this huge whole episode about how to produce actionable, sort of valuable audits. And one of the points that really interested me in your presentation deck was basically saying, look, audits don't need to be massively long and have hundreds and hundreds of points, because that's not where the value is. Do you want to talk through that? Because I've got strong opinions on different types of audits. I'd love to hear your thoughts on site audits and myths and misconceptions.
Sure. So I've certainly seen some of the content that Aleda's been putting out about tech audits and all of that stuff. Although it sounds like it's contradicting what I'm saying, I actually have a lot of time for, because it's designed to surface the things that are actually going to move the needle. There's a lot of stuff in there about strategy and doing the right thing at the right time. The kind of massive tech audits that I have a bee in my bonnet about are the ones that contain information on, you have 1,000 meta descriptions that are too long, you have too many H2s, you have things that, let's be real, those are incorrect from an SEO standpoint. And if we had unlimited time and resource in an ideal situation, yes, of course we'd address them. But there's often, I've pulled this number out of the air, but I would say that 80% of technical improvements will come from 20% of the issues that could be at play. I also want to say, before I go through the ones that I think are going to be the most important, I do massive tech audits all the time. So sometimes if it's a huge site with lots of things that could go wrong, it would be naive to say, oh, we don't need to check everything. But say, if it's a smaller site, not hundreds of thousands or millions of pages, you can focus your attention a lot better than, don't think you need to do a 200-point technical audit to improve your SEO. You can do that iteratively.
Mm. I think actually Aleda was kind enough to use a very beautiful graph I hand drew, which was showing this relationship I think you're describing, which is that sometimes the larger the site you have, the more important some otherwise unimportant technical issues can be because they scale. So the problem scales that, if you've got a 100-page site and there's some inefficiencies, it's kind of, it's not going to make a huge difference if you fix it. If you've got 500,000 pages, and then problems can really start getting out of hand and having a big impact. So do you want to take us through what you think are the kind of the things that normally move the needle that you look for?
Yeah. So I tried to keep it brief. There will be nuance in every single SEO situation, but generally, the things I come across that are causing a massive issue technically are canonicals. So whether they are incorrect or whether they're not in place. That's the duplicate content thing. You need to make sure that you mitigate against any duplicate content issues there may be. hreflang not being implemented correctly. I've had big success with sorting that out. It's surprising how often that is not implemented correctly. Poor internal linking structure, or and if you have a poor internal linking structure, no way of mitigating that through your XML sitemap. So XML sitemap's not containing the URLs you want to serve to search engines. Some people will say XML sitemaps are not required. I don't agree, and I especially don't agree because 9 times out of 10 those are the kind of sites that some people will say, oh, if the navigation is fine and all of the pages can be discovered, then an XML sitemap isn't necessary. But honestly, when does that happen? XML sitemap's very important for that reason. Redirect, many things relating to redirects. So redirect chains, older versions of sites not URLs not being redirected to their most up-to-date counterpart. So a loss of link equity. Despite the there are assertions that 301 redirects pass 100% of link equity now. So what's the problem? Well, firstly, the number of redirects that a bot needs to go through or a server needs to check slows down the page load time. So it's a site speed issue. But also there's evidence that a redirect doesn't actually pass 100% link equity. That doesn't always happen.
I think there's they said there is like a hard limit pretty much on what Googlebot's going to follow of, I think, 5 chained redirects as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that sounds like a lot, but these things can stack up really quickly. So if you leave even 2 redirects, for instance, so A to B, B to C live, when you don't realize that's stacked upon someone trying to access an insecure URL or one without a trailing slash and there's already rules, you're immediately up to 4 redirects then.
Yeah.
And you're in danger of just kind of, like you say, killing off the crawl. So I think, yeah, that's really important.
Yeah. A few others. So index bloat. This is with the bigger sites. This is with your e-commerce and big travel sites or marketplace sites. That's typically one of the major issues. You're allowing your thin content to be served to search engines. Need to do something about that to ensure that the right pages are indexed and crawled, indexed and ranked. Issues with your robots.txt file. Sometimes the most extreme is that the site could be blocked using that. That's always that facepalm moment. Many people like to share that on Twitter when they find one of their clients has done that. But no, it happens a lot.
It really does. So I actually had someone email me 2 weeks ago saying they were looking for a new SEO partner, and they sent me the site and I had a look at it, and I was quite confused because the whole site was indexed. And when I looked at the robots.txt, it was blocking everything. And I emailed them back and just said, look, just to mention this, it looks like your robots.txt is blocking everything. And it turned out actually they'd put a new site live the day before. So I sort of rechecked it 3 or 4 times. So I was confused as to why everything was, indexed and ranking properly. But yeah, it 100% still happens where whole sites get blocked.
Yeah, you caught it early. That's the main thing.
And they weren't even a client. Didn't even get to send an invoice.
A
So
couple of
you
other
think you've got
things.
a couple more things, yeah, haven't you? You've got this one's gonna, I think, scare me here because you've got stuff about JavaScript rendering here.
Yeah, and that's not something we can really do justice to in 5 minutes. But the things I want, and in fact, I had to shave some of this out of the deck. I did want to talk about JavaScript in more detail, but essentially, there's two myths attached to this. One is that JavaScript is bad for SEO, and one is that JavaScript isn't a problem for SEO anymore. Google can read JavaScript now. What's your problem? So both are incorrect. Trying to summarize this quickly, you if whenever you possibly can, you need to serve your content and resources server side, or find a way of hydrating the content so that it doesn't render client side. There's plenty of resources out there that will do this point more justice than I can in this time. There's a great series from Google, from Martin Splitt, where he goes into the detail around all of this. So I would point, if you're interested in the side of things, I'd direct you there. And Jamie Alberico, every time I see her talk, she blows my mind. She knows this right out. So, but yeah,
I'll put
definitely.
links to both of these in the show notes, so listeners can get them.
And then lastly, site speed. And I tend to have, I don't know, weird disagreements with developers on this, as if site speed isn't going to be an improvement for everyone. It's not just SEO that is trying to drive improvements in site speed. It's a UX issue, and it should be a development issue. Everyone in an organisation, I don't understand why people wouldn't want to. I mean, it will be a resource thing more often than not. But site speed, all other things being equal, if your site speed is better than a competitor, your site should start to rank better. All other things being equal, they rarely are. But it can often be something that you can address quite quickly.
So I think it's interesting there, as you know, I didn't think when I saw this you were going to be disagreeing with the lady. I thought it was interesting from an outside point of view. They seemed contradictory, those viewpoints. But what I'd add in is I've always been quite vocal on the kind of automated SEO audits that come
Yeah.
about, when people offer free audits, because the 80% of those audits will be the things you mentioned, that are things like, there's too many links on a page, there's a low text to HTML ratio, this meta description is slightly too short, things that, as you say, if you had infinite resource, you would like to get to, but they're not going to move the needle. And
Yeah.
actually, it's possible, like you said, even with the 8 things you've mentioned, it can take quite a while to get to the bottom of these. So we were working on an e-commerce site, just last week, where it had a very interesting issue when you're trying to view all the products. It was sending you to a different page if you didn't have JavaScript on, but that link was no followed, and then the view all page canonical back to a filtered page. So it was a real thing to untie. So I totally get your point in saying that, while there's this fairly short list of things that will provide most of the value, they're by no means like checkbox exercises, right?
No, absolutely
And
not.
they can't be caught by automated audits. You generally need someone, like yourself, to sit down, understand what they are, and understand how they're affecting that particular business in context of their website.
Yeah, what you say about automated audits, in the right hands, they can be a nice starting point, but in the wrong hands, you just don't want to. The idea of this talk was to stop people from going down the rabbit hole on things that weren't going to help, or following red herrings, where you can fix these things a lot quicker if you cut out the noise.
So on that, I mean, we've already at almost 40 minutes here. This has been absolutely brilliant, Natalie. Have you got any leaving general advice for like business owners or web developers to avoid the kind of traps, myths, misconceptions of SEO?
I would say, if you have time, try and read around the subject, and just try and offer, don't take recommendations as read if you have suspicion about them. if you trust your SEO partner, then trust them. That I'm not saying that everyone should be everyone should have their work checked, but just don't cast a critical eye every so often on the work that's being done. And
I think that's actually so I have a talk I've given, I think twice now, which is aimed specifically at developers, talking about technical SEO stuff that usually gets missed. And I opened that by apologizing to developers firstly for sometimes some of the advice that they'll get from from SEOs, because as it's a big industry and sometimes bad advice is given. And my advice, exactly the same as you're giving there, Natalie, is if you feel like something is wrong, or it's going to have a negative impact on the user, then do absolutely keep questioning it, because they're the experts as well in what they do. And I think good developers need good SEOs, and good SEOs need good developers, and trying to work together to get the best end product. So absolutely agree with that. Thank you so much for joining me today, Natalie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We are going to be back in 1 week's time, which will be Monday, the 23rd of March. You can get the transcription from this episode, as well as the slides we've been referring to at our show notes. The show notes are at search.withcandour.co.uk. I'll also include some links to some of the tools and resources Natalie has mentioned, so you can get them there. If you have enjoyed this episode and you're listening online, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere we found that we could put the podcast. So I'd love it if you did that. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great week, and I will speak to you again on the 23rd of March.